Hi, everyone. What a turnout. This is crazy. Very happy to have you all here. I'm Yara. I'll just give you guys a minute to make sure everyone's settling in, and we'll get right into it.
And just so you know, no pressure to turn on your video or your audio or anything like that. Um, if you want to, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, we have more people coming in, so we'll just give everyone a minute.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, our
Hi.
pleasure. All right, amazing. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. So excited to have you guys here. I am Yara. I am Embry8's Projects and Community Manager. And I'm very happy to welcome you to our first official Maker Boost event. Maker Boost is a program run by Embry8, and it's a really fairly new program. So we developed it about a year ago. And really, the gist of it is that we've created this resource as an opportunity to communicate with our community and to foster our creative community. And we'll tell you more about Maker Boost towards the end of the workshop. But essentially, we just wanted to foster good relationships with the local creatives around us because we know how amazing they are. So without further ado, I will introduce our speaker for the evening, who is also the co-founder of Embry8, and that is Scott Nihill. Scott is the person who just spoke a minute ago, and you got a brief look at him probably, but he is as I said, the co-founder of Embry8. He's worked on some amazing projects over the last 20 years, all including some grant writing experience. And so today he's going to give you all the tips and tricks, and hopefully you guys find it helpful, and there's going to be plenty of room for questions towards the end. So I'll leave it to you, Scott.
Sounds good. Thanks very much, Yara. So I'm just going to get the presentation going. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, can everyone see that? Thumbs up. Yara, you're good? Okay, all right. So just a second. So I'll just give you just a very high level what the intention of this presentation is. So I'm going to be going relatively quickly through sort of my tips and tricks, things that I've learned over the course of working on a wide variety of grants over the last 20 years. So as you'll see, it spans a fairly broad spectrum from more business-oriented grants all the way to very experimental art-based grants. So again, yeah, I'm going to be going relatively quickly. So probably in under 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I'll go through the entire presentation. And part of the reason I'm going to be going so quickly is because I really want to give an opportunity at the end for you to ask questions, and I'll be able to go back through any aspect of the grant that I went through and answer those questions. So I just encourage you to keep track of anything that maybe wasn't clear, or if any questions come up along the way. And we'll hopefully have an opportunity to get through everyone's questions. So without further ado, I'll get going. So just to give you a little bit of a sense about who I am and what I do, I'm currently involved in 3 companies. One is Embry8, and that's sort of the home of my creative original IP projects. So if you went to that website, you'd see a lot of web series, a lot of games, comics, and that kind of thing. So more on the creative side and original IP type projects. Some of them are created by Embry8 on their own, and others, and then also a good chunk are collaborations with other partners. And then Maker Boost is as described by Yara just now. And then for more of my kind of corporate based kind of work, fee for service type work, have a company called Play Factory. And so if you went to that website, you would see a much more corporate focused type approach to project creation. So that's me. So just to give you a sense of some of the type of projects and grants that I could speak to, this is a sampling of some of the projects that I've received funding for. Some of them were projects that I instigated myself. Some of them were projects that came out of collaborations with other individuals or groups of people. And it really spans a spectrum of games, web series, film, art projects, and comic books. So just to give you just a really high level sense of what some of these projects were, just so you have a bit of a better understanding of maybe some of the experience I can bring to some of the questions you have. On the bottom right, years ago did a documentary series called Artist Block, in which we got, I believe it was 10 artists from the Toronto area, representing a really diverse group of people in terms of their art practice and who they were as individuals. And we did a documentary on, and we were in particular looking for people who were struggling with creating their work, hence the name Artist Block. And what we did was created a very art-focused documentary where we got one of our performance artist friends to basically do a reality TV series style documentary series where we would sort of come up with these really quirky, arty ways to get them over their artist block, record the entire thing, and then have an art show at the end. The entire project was very fun. Very fun experience, I think, for all of us involved. The project just above that was Flub and Utter, something we did with the NFB, and that was an interactive documentary that was focusing on a poet whose work was related to difficulties in speaking. A comic book series above that, and then on the left, a whole wide variety of web series that I've been involved in. And Drift on the far left there is a game, mobile game that we got funding for that is really designed to provide a story and experience that's centered around the experience of giving people a sense of what the experience of having depression is like. So that's just really high level snapshot of some of the work that I've been involved in. So getting into the actual content of the presentation. So right off the bat, we did poll everyone, so wanted to get a sense of sort of what type of grants that you might be interested in applying for. And it did seem like it was skewing a little bit more towards the art spectrum. So that would be the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, Toronto Arts Council. The list of grants on the left is just a high level summary. These are probably the more popular ones. There's a whole wide array of different types of funding opportunities that you could go after, but these are kind of the low-hanging fruit. But there was also people that expressed interest in some of the other media-based funding bodies, such as Bell Fund, Ontario Creates, Canada Media Fund, TELUS Fund. There are others beyond that, like the Shaw Fund, the Rocket Fund, and things like that. But there's that media group, which are not really so much focused on creating, quote unquote, art-based projects. And then there's of course the option of crowdfunding your project, and all of in my experience, and I've also crowdfunded projects. My experience is that the process is very much the same, regardless of whether or not you're working on an art grant, media grant, or crowdfunding. It's really the fundamentals are all the same. What I've done here is I've also just tried to indicate which, depending on what type of project you're interested in, which funds may be more applicable to you. Now, each one of these funds has potentially upwards that you may be aware has up to 20 different sub-programs. So this is very much a hyper generalized kind of matrix. And for example, you could create a game that would be technically an art project and apply to the Canada Council for the Arts. So I didn't select yes there just because I was really thinking more of what you would traditionally think of as a game and how you would apply it to that fund. But typically the Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, Toronto Arts Council, first and foremost, what they're there to do is support an art project. So you have to rationalize your project from that standpoint. So this is just kind of a high level summary of the type of grants that you might be able to apply to. And again, a lot of what the things that I'm going to be saying are really coming from a philosophical perspective in terms of how I approach grant writing and some of the really high level sort of things that I've learned about the process. But But as I was mentioning, whether you're applying for one of the more art-based grants or a media arts grant, like the Bell Fund Ontario creates, the fundamentals are going to be the same. So in every case that you're going to need to describe your project, you're going to need to provide a sample of your work. You're going to have a solid team. You're going to need to be able to prove that you're able to, actually create this project and get it out to the world. They'll all ask you for a budget and schedule, and they're all going to want to know how it is that you're going to promote that project. And it's going to be that all combined that's going to really determine whether or not that jury is going to accept your project. And on the note of art versus business grants, I put the little note about the mullet strategy, but it is something that I do incorporate into my, as part of my philosophy, not the hairstyle, but the idea of sort of combining art and business. And so for me personally, I really do like to always have a project that I would consider more experimental, and a project that is maybe more commercially oriented. And I don't think I could survive as an artist without having that dichotomy. That's just my own personal preference. So presuming that you've gone through the various funding agencies that are available, and you found the grant body that you think is maybe the appropriate one that you want to apply for. So really it comes to the first question is this particular grant of this subset of this granting body, is this the right fit for your project? And I've definitely made this mistake many times, where I was so excited about a project that I was working on, and I just kind of had a feeling like it just sounded like the right application. And this may seem insane to you, but I actually didn't really read the guidelines, and I just submitted an application because I thought it was a pretty amazing idea, and I was pretty sure that they would love it and I would be accepted. And of course, I didn't get the funding, and those were some of the early lessons that I learned. And seems obvious to me now, but it may not be obvious to you now if you're just starting out. But definitely read the guidelines in detail, and just make sure that what they're describing fits your project. And that leads me to the next thing, which is the importance of really assessing your project across what it is that fund is actually looking for. And some funds provide a grant matrix, and I've got an example on this page here. And this is an example from the Ontario Creates Interactive Digital Media Fund. And what they've done is they've actually broken down and listed the various criteria by which they're going to judge your project. Things like the track record of who you are as a company, or as a group. What is going to be the benefit to the Ontario economy, etc. And they've also provided percentages just to give you sort of a guide as to how important is that one section. And so something that I've learned to do now in my grant writing process is the first thing to do is, whether they provide that matrix or not, is to assemble the matrix if they don't, and then to write down next to each one of those questions how I would argue the merits of my project based on that criteria. And if I can't honestly say to myself that I could score at least a 90% on that matrix, then maybe I should rethink my project. So I find that a very useful activity to do, and it really is an easy way to sort of show where you may be weak in your project, and where you may want to focus on before you get started. And the other thing that is really important, and it's something that even today that I struggle to do, because though I know it's something I should do, I still fear the process of reaching out to the grant body itself and talking to them about my project. I think, even though I know it's ridiculous for me not to do that, because these people are paid to do this exact thing, which is to make sure that the people who are applying to the fund actually are applying to the right fund, aren't making the mistake that I made, early on in my process by applying for something that just had no relevance to the fund. So they're there to act as kind of this buffer to make sure that you are going to apply a project that's going to be successful and not going to be irrelevant for the jury when they're reviewing them. So first thing to do. Once you've kind of got a general sense of whether or not you think your project is a good fit, you've read through the guidelines, is call them up and pitch them on your project. And it's a great thing to do, is to build that relationship with the people that are there to coordinate the project. So another thing, this is the hardest thing for me to wrap my head around, I think, but it is something that I repeat to myself whenever I'm applying for funding, which is that the chances are probably 50% chance that I'm going to fail at any given application that I put forward. And I've been doing this for 20 years, and I fail just about as often as I did when I started. And there's lots of reasons for that, why you might fail. It might be because it's a new fund and I'm trying to figure out the nuances of it, and it can be challenging. There's very few funds that provide explicit detail in terms of exactly what it is that you need to provide in order to be successful. Some do, and some are actually getting really good at it, but many don't. I think a lot of people find when they're applying for funding that it's a bit of a nebulous experience, and even if you talk to the coordinator, it's not always clear why you didn't receive the funding. And there are sometimes, I think, weird politics and other kind of subjective reasons why a perfectly amazing project wouldn't be accepted. So reality is probably a good chance you're going to fail just about as often as you succeed. And something that I try to remind myself to just kind of ease the pain of failing at applying is that really, whether I get the funding or not, applying for the grant forces me to think through a project in a lot of detail. It's a step I would have needed to make regardless of whether or not I got funding. And I'm also tempted sometimes, even if I don't want to, or I'm not ready to necessarily apply for a particular grant, I'm almost tempted to fill out all of the sort of answer all the questions they want me to answer, because I kind of need to do that anyways. So this is another kind of, this may seem very counterintuitive to people, but I do believe this pretty strongly, which is that to apply for, to be successful, to increase your chance of being successful in applying for funding, you actually want the jury to not read your application, or read it as minimally as possible. And that may be something that sounds very counterintuitive to you, and maybe just wrong, but I'll try to explain my rationale. So if you think about what the process of being on the jury is like, is you're probably with, between 5 and 10 of your peers, and you're potentially reading upwards of 100 applications to this fund. And in many cases, these people are not paid to do this work, or given a very modest minimum kind of honorarium. So you can imagine what that experience would be like to try to assess all of these applications. And you are probably not going to read in every single page that people submit. What you're probably going to do is you're going to, if it's an art grant, you're probably going to first just watch, you're going to do the fun thing. You're going to watch the videos or the sample work, view the sample work that people submitted, because that's really fun. You get to watch, you get to look at art and just, use your eyes and just feel whether or not you think this is somebody that you want to support. So the first thing, and this is again for an art grant, that's probably what most of the jury is going to do. And then they're going to decide based on who they have a feeling they want to support, and then they'll start the process of reading the applications. For the media arts grants, they may not do that. They'll probably focus on, for example, the project presentation first, which I've given an example of here. And they're probably going to get about as far as the first page. And then they're going to first skim through all the first pages, and they're going to make an assessment on, who is it that I want to support. So if your first page doesn't basically give them all the information that they need, and do that in a way that makes it really easy to digest, then you are increasing the chance that you're not going to be successful, because there's a good chance you just may get dropped to the bottom of the pile and given less consideration. So for me, when it comes to sort of formatting and writing the application, I always try to be as clear and concise as I possibly can. And I put a little note here, like, write it for your grandmother. And this is something that I actually something that I do, is not my grandmother, but but my mother is, I always try to pick somebody who I think wouldn't get what it is that I'm trying to write. And I try to communicate that to them in the most plain language possible. And this goes for any type of project, whether you're applying for the most like absolutely ridiculous, insane experimental project, you still have to be able to communicate it to your mother in a way that she would understand. That may seem a little bit ridiculous, but it is true, because the jury are not necessarily familiar with the subset of the art discipline that you are interested in. And so you have to presume that they have their own interests, and that you have to convince somebody who actually may not even really like your discipline and your particular approach to art making to back your project. So the more plain your language is, the more accessible your idea is going to be. So I really try as much as possible not to use any jargon, whether it's on a commercial projects. That's a game. I'm not going to use any kind of insider sort of technical jargon regarding the technology. If it's an art project, I'm not going to use any kind of art speak to try to make myself sound smart and intelligent. And believe me, I've definitely written applications that sounded excessively pretentious. I have no doubt. But I don't think I I didn't receive funding for those projects. And definitely get somebody to proofread it. My grammar is insanely bad. It's definitely one of my weaknesses when it comes to grant writing. So I know where my weaknesses are. That's definitely one of them. So I as much as possible, try to get my applications proofread by somebody. So I'm not going to talk a lot about the business strategy and the promotional strategy because these are big topics that I could go into a lot of depth on. Some applications, like if you're applying for an art grant, they don't really care about your business strategy. If anything, if you try to talk about how much money you're going to make, it's not necessarily going to help you. If you're applying to one of the, like an Ontario Creates, which is a fund which is very much centered around the business plan. You have to make a very strong business case for why your project is going to make a positive impact on the taxpayer investment, who are ultimately sort of putting up the funds for your project. But with that said, for me, the cornerstone of a strong promotional and a business strategy is about finding a very strong partner. It might be multiple partners, but it is great if you can find one entity that has a massive audience, has an existing very large reach, that is interested in partnering with you to help you to get exposure for your project. And that kind of solves both the business and promotional component of it. And that may sound easier said than done. And for me, it's taken me decades to find those partners, ones that I'm now able to use now for some of our projects. But it is a really essential thing to at least be actively working on. And as a creative myself, it's the last thing that I want to do, because really what I want to do is make my art. I want to create things. I don't want to necessarily think about things like finding a strategic promotional and business partner. But I have forced myself to do that, and can attest that it can really help you when it comes to applying for any type of fund. Again, just checking the time, because I do want to leave a chance for questions. Sorry, just 2 seconds. Yeah, I think we're good. So I'm getting close to the end. So I'm going to just talk very quickly about the budget and the schedule. Again, I won't go into too much detail. These are 2 samples of the budget preparation and the schedule that we've used for projects in the past. The main things I wanted to emphasize is that I think that for creatives sometimes that are less experienced, the process of creating a budget and schedule can feel a little bit daunting. Where do you come up with these numbers? How do you even know this? I mean, I do this for free already. So how do I value these things? I can remember having some of those questions when I was first starting off. Some of the very overarching things that I would say about that is that a budget really comes from the schedule to a certain degree. And so what you can see in this slide is that I've listed color coded on the left there, the kind of high level people in green, in purple, some of the creative people, and then in blue there, some of the kind of pre-production actual, sorry, the pink purple color is sort of the pre-production planning, and then the blue is the actual process of implementing it. And then I've listed out the various people and tasks that would be needed in order to, you know, get through these sort of activities. And then what I've done is just written down the number of hours that I think it would take in order to complete those various activities. And then if you then tally up all of those hours and then assign a value to that, effectively what you get is your budget. They ultimately end up being two separate documents, and they don't have to be perfectly synced with each other. The jury is never going to hawk your budget and schedule with that much detail. They just want to make sure that you're thinking through this in a relative amount of detail. So I won't go into too much detail, but if you have more questions, I'm happy to answer it. Again, I won't talk too much about the team. I think this is pretty self-evident, but when it comes to your project, and it depends on the scale of the project. This is a personal project, then you're your team. You don't have to worry about this. Ignore this slide. But if you're working on any kind of group project, you are going to need to have a really solid team. And if you're maybe a new student coming out of school and you've been working with some of your friends maybe a game project that you think is really great and you want to apply for funding, you and your team you may know yourselves to be incredibly inspired people who are fully capable of realizing the project, but the jury may not see it the same way, because what the jury is going to be looking for is your track record and you being able to show that you have the experience to deliver on what it is that you're trying to do. So at the end of the day, really you have to ask yourself is, how do our resumes present ourselves, and will this jury of professionals agree that these resumes can effectively do the project? And that might bring you back to this biz promo sort of tactic, which would be to find a partner, find a group who've already done sort of the type of things that you're trying to do, and develop a relationship with them through some way, shape, or form. So I won't talk too much about that. And then I think this is the last point, but when it comes to work samples, again, I think that this is pretty self-evident, and this is probably the part that most artists enjoy the most in creating. But this is where you are demonstrating to the jury kind of who you are as an artist. And as I said, if you're applying for an art grant, this is probably the thing that they're looking at first, and it may be the only thing of what you present that that they look at. So one thing that I would say is, because this can represent such an important aspect of your application, this is the area where you really want to put the most creativity into how you present who you are. And I can say from experience that a big part of my success, I think, has been making it seem making it seem that I'm able to do more than I'm able to at any given time. And I think that has been to some degree a part of my success, which with some of these applications, which is there's an element of that kind of bullshit artistry that is kind of necessary when it comes to grant writing. And the people who are successful are maybe not better artists than you are, but they're better at bullshitting than you are. And so a big part of the art game or the new media game is making it kind of seem like you are maybe a little more developed as an artist than you actually are. So getting into the questions section, here's just a quick summary in terms of just some of the key points that I was mentioning. Just to be clear, we are going to send you a link, a follow-up on probably on Monday with a recording of this session, if that's at all useful to you, along with the slides in this presentation. So you don't have to you're welcome to, but you don't have to take screen capture or write any of this stuff down. But this is kind of the high level of what I've learned over the course of applying for funding. And I just wanted to just provide some clarity in terms of MakerBoost and how we envision it. MakerBoost, for myself and the other partners in the company, we've created this because we really do have a passion for collaboration, and we really do want to find a way to sort of give back our expertise to kind of that next generation, or even people of older generations that are interested in collaborating with us. So it really represents that desire to just to be working on new and exciting, interesting things, and to make sure that we're keeping our pulse to what's going on in our city and our country and the world. We do also provide, for anyone that's interested, a fee-for-service sort of work in terms of grant writing, all that sort of stuff, if you're at all interested in it. But really, the focus of MakerBoost is really centered around the development of the free resources, and we'll be curious to see what other kind of resources people would like us to expand upon. So anyways, with that said, now's your time to just ask any kind of questions that you have, and I'll do my best to answer them. And I would love to also, you're welcome to tell me a little bit about a project that you're working on and anything like that. It's I think we've got how much time? Yep. So we've got about half an hour.
There's a raise hand function in Zoom, and then I see some people raising their hands. So I guess there's Nadine Wetlauer. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Who raised her hand?
I'm just curious because you the early slide had comics in it, and my partner, he's a comics artist and animator, and I'm just curious, were there grants available for comics, or were you doing that as crowdfunding?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was just trying to search for you in the matrix of all the people here, just to sort of put a face to a name. But yeah, that's a great question. I'll do my best to answer it. So yeah, I did produce a comic book. It has been a sort of a passion of mine, and something I guess that I'm still doing. And so the thing I learned through that process is that the Canadian arts bodies and the funding agencies, there's a bit of a weird gap when it comes to comic book art. It doesn't really fit anywhere. And even though I think most people would argue that comic book art is a 100% valid art form, whether you're addressing it from in like the art, capital A art perspective, or the commercial media art form, but there aren't a lot of granting body opportunities for that. Now there are publishing grants that you can get funding for, but to a certain degree you need to be a publishing company or have a publisher on board that's willing to support your project. But it's kind of weird that as an independent artist that there aren't a lot of great options when it comes to being to creating a comic book, Now you could try to, now there are options where I think people have tried to present their comic book project as an art project through one of the art bodies, and kind of trying not to talk too much about the history and the legacy of comic books, and really try to present it more as an art illustration project. That is something that I know that people have done, but that has been my experience.
Thank you.
So I have a lot of people raising their hands and some people asking questions in the chat. So how about I moderate some of this and ping pong between the two? There's a question in the chat from Justila who asks, how do you find the coordinator to focus on when you're crafting your grant?
Yeah, good question. So if you go to, in most cases, the coordinator would be listed within the description of the fund itself. So I'm pretty sure most of them are pretty good about listing who that person is, or providing some kind of contact information right on the website. Now, some of them may hide that information in the maybe the downloadable project, the granting, the grant description. But for the most part, yeah, that should be available on the website.
All right, we have a question from Adam who asks, have you had much success with crowdfunding for film and TV or web series? You personally, Scott.
Yeah, so I did, I have run successful crowdfunding campaigns. And what I learned from that was, and unsuccessful ones, I should mention. But the thing I learned from crowdfunding, they're two completely different beasts, the granting process and the crowdfunding process. The benefit of the granting process is that you're speaking to a jury of your peers. The thing that kind of sucks about that is you don't know who those people are. You never actually have any kind of interaction with them. The crowdfunding, the benefit of it is that you're actually speaking to your not only your peers but your audience, the people that you're creating this concept for. What the challenge is how do you reach those people? Because the crowdfunding, all the crowdfunding platforms are highly saturated. So you need to have an audience, a baked-in audience before you go in, which really then brings up the point of the whole biz promo aspect. You really, if you don't have a large social following or a large engaged audience, then you need to find one. And if you don't have one, it doesn't mean it's a no-go, but it just means you've got to track that down.
Okay, amazing. We'll take an in-person question from Maziar.
Hi, thank you. My question is, I know a lot of great films I've been realizing are based on books, and I want to know if you guys have any experience with the world of optioning, if that's the right term. I know Bell Media has a grant for getting the rights to a book, and then if you want to change it into a film or a film adaptation. So I know nothing about that stuff, but I'm curious about that. If you have any experience with something like that.
Yeah, you know what? I don't have a lot of experience myself with optioning, but I do know a little bit about it. But yeah, it's, I've had friends who were relatively inexperienced as filmmakers who reached out to an author that they read a book, a short story, and they really liked the book, and reached out to the author, and via that person's publisher got permission to option the story. And it was as simple as that. They had no real name credibility behind them, and were still able to do that. So it is absolutely something that is possible, and it doesn't necessarily require money or a lot of background as an artist. So I think it's worth it to, if there is a work that you're very interested in, to reach out to the author and see what the options are. They'll probably put you in touch with their publisher if they have one, or their agent. But it can't hurt to see what that option is. But if you're talking about maybe getting an option from a really well-known author where there's already a lot of interest in their work, then it's going to be a lot more probably challenging and maybe costly to get that option.
Okay, we'll take maybe 2 written questions. Someone is asking, Amina is asking, do art grants work for photography projects?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So all of the art bodies, the Canada Council, the Ontario Arts Council, the Toronto Arts Council, they all do support those type of projects. Really, I mean, I would safely say that if there's an art program for it, like at OCAD or that sort of thing, then there's a granting body that would support that, to support that discipline.
We have a question from Nellie who asks, how does pro grant writing work?
Yeah, so, and I guess I'm guessing that you are referring to just the idea of maybe getting some grant writing assistance. Yeah. So yeah. So we do in some cases we do work with whether it's friends or just complete strangers that are interested in getting assistance with writing a grant. And so we have there's a lot of different arrangements that we've gotten into, and we do kind of take it on a project to project basis because depending on how busy we are with our projects, um, but yeah, if you are interested, it would be as simple as sending us an email, and Yara will be following up with everybody in terms of just giving you the update on this presentation. But if you are interested, you're welcome to ask. And we charge on basically on an hourly basis, depending on how much work that you're looking for. So there are some cases where somebody feels like they've got a pretty good handle on the process, but they just would like to get some professional feedback on it. So that might only require a couple of hours, 2 to 4 hours. So that might be, the cost of that might actually not be that prohibitive to you. But we've also worked in other cases where we've come on as the lead grant writer for a large media arts project, where they were applying for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so the costs associated with that would obviously be more, but we really take it on a case-by-case basis.
Awesome. We'll take an in-person question from Michael Lee.
Hi, Scott. Thank you so much for your words. I wish I really got to tune in a little bit more. I came in a little bit late, so I hope none of my questions are a little bit, I want to say, answered already. But the first question I had was actually going back to what you were saying with your pro grant writing. How do I say it? Is there a process in working with the person if they have like a solid idea and they just want to just like wrap it up in that? And the second question I had also was, I noticed that there was a chart and listed was like art, music, games, books. What about grant writing for, let's say, mobile applications, a platform, or even more in the sense, alternatively, I've got this idea, start a business where I'm looking to apply to an incubator. And essentially, I see it almost no different with a grant pitch to, let's say, you're going to like a Shark Tank or an incubator where you're asking for money as well. Does the pro writing cover that? And what are your thoughts on that whole style of writing?
Yeah, good, really, really good questions, and a lot to unpack there. I'll try to do it as briefly as possible. So yeah, I mean, in my experience, being someone who's worked on very experimental art projects through to projects that have a very more corporate kind of minded pursuit. I mean, one of the things that I've realized, and I think we can all appreciate this, in an age of like Apple and Steve Jobs, which is that distinction between what is experimental and artistic and a great new business idea is very much blurred, and is, I think, only increasingly becoming so, as we go forward. So it can be sometimes hard to sort of make that distinction sometimes, because what is my project? Is it a great new business idea, or is it a brilliant new art project? It can be hard to kind of make that call. But so to answer your question about if you've got a great new app idea, there are funds out there that will support the creation of, for example, like an app. Now, most of the media arts grants, like the CMF and the Ontario Creates, those type of funds, which do have funds for games and app development, the thing to consider is that a lot of them, they're not necessarily looking to support platforms. So they don't want to create the next YouTube, but what they want to see is they want to see you create maybe an app that is creating a new entertainment experience. And that actually took a while for me to unpack and actually really fully understand what it means. So that may not mean a lot to you right now, but that's the best way that I can describe it. And yeah, and so absolutely, like our, in terms of our, the grant fee for service grant writing that we provide, and that we do with people, yeah, it covers that as well. We've developed a number of applications with some of our partners and new startup ideas. And again, it's just because these days it feels like it's hard to distinguish between, oh, I'm starting a new company. No, I'm starting a new art project. Oh no, I'm starting a new app. Well, it's all those things. So that's been my experience.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for the question.
Awesome. And we have another question from Amina, who asks, does Embryate work on international grants, and are they available for Canadian charities?
That's a really good question. So yeah, and that's something I didn't mention at all in the grant matrix. My grant matrix was very much focused around a Toronto creator's perspective, just for the sake of simplicity. But yeah, there's a whole host of grants and foundations that in some cases are available to Canadians. And for example, the US is a main one. Tons of foundations down there. In some cases, you have to be associated with an American citizen, but that goes back to the whole Biz Prono slide that I had, which was maybe reach out and connect with an American artist and do a partnership with them, so you can take advantage of that. There's also almost all the funding bodies they recognize that of the importance in our day and age of doing these global partnerships. And whether that's in the film TV sector or the art sector, they all recognize that us connecting and creating and collaborating with people from around the world is important. So a lot of them have travel funds, a lot of them have exhibition funds, a lot of them have also co-production funds that are available for people. So if you can make these connections with people in other countries, you can take advantage of the funding that's here, and they can take advantage of the funding that's there.
There's a question on COVID and whether it has impacted grant funding, excuse me.
That's a good question. I don't know, but I would suspect that because of COVID and the shutdowns, that the granting bodies have probably seen a massive influx in applications. So it may, this is just speculation, but I would suspect that they've probably seen a very large increase in people applying because they have the time to do it, and they also need the money because it's kind of a scary time right now, and people are financially insecure. So let's make ourselves more secure by applying for funding. But in many ways, I think COVID has, to some degree, probably jump-started a lot of projects that would have never been made without this kind of weird interruption in the usual, in people's usual day-to-day lives.
Awesome. We have an in-person question from Farah.
Thank you. Hi. Hi, Scott.
Hi,
so I have a twofer, and one of them, which is not a good question, is what if you had two applications extremely similar in every way? They bullshitted the same way, their portfolio looks great. What would have, in your view, tip it towards one more than the other? What are they actually looking for specifically that would have it tip?
I see. So your question is, what? And let me see if I get you right. But I think what you're sort of suggesting, which is that, and I don't think I mentioned this, but I think that probably in many cases these funds are so overprescribed that your project could get a 90% or even a 95% in terms of the scoring, and you would still not get the funding, because it's not because you don't have a great idea. It's not because the jury didn't like your work. It's just because they had to make a choice. So, and is that right? And so your question is, what would be maybe that if I was to pick one or two things that would that I would focus on the most in order to make sure, yeah. Um, yeah, so now that's something that really does, so it really does change depending on the fund that you're applying to. So if you're applying to an arts grant, so it's really an art project, less of a business-minded media arts project. If you're applying for an arts project, again, because I think that it's not every case, and I can't speak for every jury, but I think the juries are probably going to lean in on the creative packages that the artists have supplied. So you really want to then make sure that what you're presenting in terms of your body of work is the strongest, because that's going to be the thing that everything else is really all they're going to do is just to make sure that you've just checked off all the boxes, but they're really going to be making a decision based on the art. And that gets into the whole subjectivity thing, which can be really tough. But I think it's important to, I can say from the perspective of a white male that, when it comes to the art bodies, that they are actively looking to support people that don't look like me. And I think that's a great thing. But I think, in terms of when I'm applying, if I'm going to apply to an arts fund, how do I get around that? And again, I 100% support that, but it means that I'm going to maybe collaborate with people that don't look like me and that represent a broader spectrum of the population, things like that. So I only say that just to say that it's important to really respect what it is that the fund itself is trying to achieve in their goals. And that can be really challenging because the passion is in what it is that you're trying to create. And what I may be trying to create doesn't always line up with what it is that the fund is trying to do. But it's just, that is sometimes my frustration with applying for funding, is that oftentimes it is inserting like a square peg into a round hole. If you don't adapt to that audience, then you won't be successful.
Thank you. And I think you've somewhat answered my second question, but I'll just quickly reiterate. If me, a Pakistani woman in Canada, is applying for a grant, and I have somebody in Pakistan who also wants to somewhat do it, would it work better in my favor to actually coordinate or have collaboration with Canadian, even a Pakistani in Canada versus a Pakistani in Pakistan? Do they want more of Canadian teamwork?
That's a really interesting question. My gut would tell me that, and if you're talking about, I think any type of project, but if you're talking about like an art, like an gallery type,
cartoon series.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I think they're going to want to really see strong partners, and I think everyone appreciates in today's day and age that that having strong global partners is only an asset. I can't think of a scenario where that wouldn't be a strong asset.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott.
No problem. My pleasure.
Amazing. There's a question that goes, I'm an artist and I'm wondering, if you are awarded a grant, is there a budget reconciliation after the project is over? And what happens if you are over or under budget because you've miscalculated?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So yeah, so the budget can be a tricky thing to figure out. So in terms of, like, if you're applying for an art grant, they're going to want to have a really strong, the jury's going to know kind of what these things cost, and they're going to be able to relatively quickly kind of be able to assess, does this budget make sense? Does this seem reasonable given the type of project that this person is working on? Now, in the event you get the money, and then in the process of creating it, that let's say you go under budget, well, then you don't, there's almost no scenario where you would go out of your way to notify them of that. I don't think it's really necessary unless you've grossly underestimated. I'm sure that you'll find a way to kind of pad the budget and find some good use of the time and to apply it to the project. I don't think that's ever really a realistic scenario, but if you go over budget, that can be a problem. But the funding body is less worried about that, because if you go over budget, they're not paying for that overage. So the worst case scenario would be that you would have had to pay for that extra amount. Now, a lot of the Arts Council organizations, I think they're less concerned about that issue, unless you're at a level where you're getting audited. But yeah, it's not the worst problem to have, but it is a bit of a problem if you've run out of money and you can't actually finish the project. That would be a pretty big problem, and one that you would probably want to try to figure out in terms of just doing whatever it takes to get the thing done.
Awesome. We have a question that asks, can you ask funding or the grant for your own personal artwork? So can you ask for funding/grant funding for your own personal artwork?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. 100%. And that is more towards a lot of the arts councils, but 100%. I mean, that's a lot of them, all of them have an individual component. They've got an organizational component, and then I think there's one other one, but anyways.
Awesome. We have a question from Judy, who asks, how do you decide the best part of a script to submit? Often you are only asked to submit around 10 pages. Do you pick the most impactful, the best characters, the part that really shows the overall story? Yeah.
Yeah, I would, I mean, that's a good question, and it really depends on the nature of the script. I mean, if you have kind of an intentionally slow opening to a film, let's say, and it's just the nature of the project, that might be, maybe hard to. You may feel like it's ill-advised to present those opening minutes of the piece, but I mean, I think the crux of your project really is going to be reliant on the work that you've submitted. That is maybe the past work that you've created, the past films that you've created, and that's, I think, really going to be the crux of what the jury is going to be deciding upon. So the script is there to just give them a sense of, okay, they've read your project description, they've got a strong sense of what it is that you're trying to do. When they're getting to the script, they're now just trying to this is probably when they're, to answer that previous question, this is when they're starting to sort of split straws, and they're kind of thinking, all right, I love these two projects. Let's read the script and let's actually see how this thing is going to unfold. So I don't think I'm answering your question specifically, but I think what I'm hoping to just sort of convey is that the script, I suspect, is probably one of the last things that they're reading. And if your script is going to have to be strong, no matter what scenario you're in.
Awesome. I do want to point out that it's about 2 minutes to 7, but we did leave about 15 minutes extra buffer for this meeting. So just no pressure for anyone who wants to stay or leave. We're here. And next question would be, I'd like to know how to, when writing a grant budget, place a value on one's time. I'm a painter and have always struggled with finding a dollar value for the time I plan to invest in a project. Materials, rent, etc. are relatively easy, but time, especially when spending 100+ hours on a piece, is for me complicated. Thank you. So,
yeah, that is, I think, one of the things that I struggled with the most, especially when I was first getting out of school. Which was, I was spending all my time making art and not getting paid for it. So when asked the question of how much how much money do I think that I would want to be charged for this was an impossible thing for me to answer. And I was very nervous with the idea of maybe overvaluing it. But I was also nervous about undervaluing it. So it can be a really, it can be a really hard question to answer. But I think that I mean, you are the only one that actually knows your process. You know your process more than anyone else does. So I think first and foremost, I would say just keep track of how long these things take you, and give yourself a modest amount of a salary in order to create that work. That's sort of valued maybe close to what you think that your value to the world at large might be. So if you make $40 an hour in your job, and because you're at that level, maybe you could rationalize that amount. If you right now are making $15 an hour, maybe rationalize yourself as at $20 an hour, and as an artist. That might be a ballpark by which to go on.
Amazing. We have a question from Michael Lee again.
Yeah, it was a quick question. Are there any guidelines in sending out an email requesting for the pro grant writing? Anything particular?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. We don't have, it's something we're planning on working on, which is just having some resources on our website where we can just kind of answer some of those questions. We don't have that right now. But what I would say is, for now, is we'll make sure to provide some of that information in our follow-up email. But what I can say right now is just let us know if you're interested, in potentially in getting help with an application that you're planning on doing. And it is, I would say, in under a page, like in as brief a way possible. Maybe just tell us what like what kind of, tell us maybe in a paragraph what your project is about, what kind of funding that you're aware of that you're interested in getting, and what kind of help you think you need based on maybe what phase of the project you're in.
I see. And again, would you say this style of like pro grant writing or just grant writing in general is still applicable to if you were to pitch this to incubators or Shark Tanks?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you had that. I don't think I answered that question that you had previously, but it is different, the grant writing process, but it is absolutely, the fundamentals are basically the same. And in the course of our projects, we've had to go through that process in order to fund in order to fund some of our projects.
What process?
Oh, going through the process of applying for venture capital funds, like going through the process of getting.
I see. I see. So, yeah. So there is experience there, and that can be done through your help, if needed. Yep. Okay, thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Of course.
We have a private question that asks whether a person can write to us describing what they need for their project.
Yeah, I think the answer is I think it's yes, because I think you were just asking if you were able to do that, but yeah, you'd absolutely be able to do that. And this is most of the work that we have done to date has been through our sort of network of creators, and we've really relied on the people that we've known. But I think with our MakerBoost program, we're really trying to reach out to people that are not a part of our immediate network necessarily, and to see how we may be able to collaborate and support each other. So we don't really have, I admit that we don't have very clear sort of processes that we can point you to, as I'd mentioned. But when we send out that email, when Yara sends out that email, we'll make sure to just address those questions in particular and give you some guidance around that.
One last question. What question, if there's time? I've been awarded a small solo art show in an established artist-run gallery in the US. The contract is forthcoming, but I suspect that I will be footing the shipping and travel accommodations bills. Given that this is the US, is there any way to make a proposal more attractive, given that would be experienced by an American audience and not a Canadian one?
And I think congratulations, because I think you said that you were accepted into that gallery. So that's great. And so you are. I'm just not sure what the question was in relation to because you've been accepted, but now you have to get the work there. But I just wasn't clear on what the question was from there.
The person says that the contract is forthcoming. But that they suspect that they will be paying the shipping and travel accommodation bills. And then the question is, given that this is in the US, is there a way to make the proposal more attractive because it's going to be an American audience experiencing it rather than a Canadian audience?
Right. Yeah. And it's. I was just curious what the person meant by proposal, I guess, because are they applying for something there? I'm wondering if if the question is what would be maybe some cultural difference between America and Canada in terms of how they may view or judge a granting application. That's a really good question. I think at the end of the day, there are major differences. If I'm reading the question right. The reality is that, in my experience, is that even within Canada, between the various funds, and even funds that seem to have the same, you would think have the same objective, because they're both, let's say, trying to support films, for example, or web series. Even between these two separate bodies, which seem very similar, they have a completely different philosophy in terms of the type of projects that they're looking to support. And this is just within Canada, within what would appear to be the same kind of fund. Yeah, there's definitely the possibility for there being some major kind of, differences in terms of how any one fund or organization in the US approach things. But I think I would just go back to that point, which is try to understand as much about that organization as you can, whether it's learning more, whether they have the documentation about the fund or whatever it is on their site, whether it's learning more about who that organization is and what their values are, and repeat that back to them through the process of providing that proposal. That's probably the best that I could say there.
All right, we have an in-person question from Nadine again.
Yes, thank you. I have a question about I guess it's kind of a weird in the cracks question, sort of like the comics question I asked at the beginning. One of the things that my partner is working on that I help with is a project that's sort of a publishing project, like an atlas of monsters. So he's a comics artist, it's illustrated with an illustration. There's an entry for each monster, but it's all organized geographically, and it's published as like installments of a series of monsters. So with that kind of publishing project, is that because in a sense it's artistic, but in another sense it's not? It's in that kind of gray area of what is it, and where would one go to apply perhaps for grant funding to help fund future editions and installments?
Yeah, that's a great question. It sounds like a cool project.
I think it is. So
yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I find myself in that problem, if you could call it that, all the time. And there's benefits and detractions, I guess, from having these kind of mixed media projects. The benefit being that, well, you could take advantage of maybe a lot of different funding organizations, for me, the challenge sometimes is that because I see the project in this kind of nebulous zone, I have a hard time communicating to any one body what my project is because they want me to communicate it from the perspective of the fund. So if it's an illustration, an art illustration, or let's just say like a fund that supports painting and illustration, that type of thing, they're going to be looking at it from that lens. And if I'm not able to kind of really talk about it just as that, they'll get lost in the details about how this is also going to be this, and then it could also spawn off a web series, and then there'll be maybe, this, it'll also be a book, and then there'll be this user generated, all that kind of stuff starts to get confusing from one of the funds. And I've definitely run into that mistake, that problem where I'm pretty sure when I looked back at an application that I provided, I realized that I wasn't filtering my application specifically for that jury, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Does that answer the question, or?
Sort of. I'm just wondering, are there certain funds or places that such a project might fit better with, or do we just have to read through everything to see where it kind of shoehorns in?
Yeah, there's so for a project of that nature, it sounds like, because you're saying that it's you could argue it as a gallery, maybe illustration type project. And if the creator has a background presenting their work in galleries, which is one of the sort of things that they'll be looking for. They want to see that you participated in that world and you've got a CV, then yeah, you could position it as that, and maybe as like a little bit of an addendum, talk about some of the other ideas. Like you can talk a little bit about it, but just not watering down the application. And then and it certainly, you could approach a publisher about potentially packaging up this set of illustrations as a book and maybe get some funding through one of the publishing granting bodies. That would be a possibility, and maybe even crowdfund the project as a whole.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it might come back to those publishing grants that are based on the publisher applies for the grant in that case.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, on the publishing side, it's I'm less experienced on the publishing side of things, but I think it is if it maps to the same way that for example, the web series or the film or the TV stuff works, it's the production company that's applying, but you need a publisher on board in order to who's basically agreed to distribute and publish and distribute your work.
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong, but that's sort of how it works with the other media funds.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good to know, to have this much information, even if it's not absolutely for sure all definite, but yes, because it is, we realize it's that kind of borderline project and therefore hard to see where it goes in terms of looking at who to apply to.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you very much.
No problem. My pleasure.
Awesome. We have 2 more questions, and I think we'll be good to wrap this up. I just want to give a shout out to Maziar, who's just answering people's questions in the chat and sending helpful links. Pretty awesome of him. Our next question is, can I apply for an arts education community project?
Can I apply for an arts education community project? I'm not sure. So yeah, so what you're talking about is creating a art project that is designed to support a community, maybe in Toronto or something like that, I'm guessing. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So many different types of ways that you can be active and creative in this world. So yeah, there are, and I think that's actually a really interesting aspect. I think it's only become increasingly something that the funding bodies support, because I think they've recognized that that's a perfectly legitimate way to express yourself as an artist. Oftentimes, Ontario Arts Council, Toronto Arts Council, Canada Council for the Arts, they all have funding sort of grants within their organizations for those type of activities.
Awesome. And our last question from Christine is asking for a research grant to develop an ongoing project different than asking for an art project grant. And is it possible?
Sorry, there was just a bit of, I just missed the beginning part of that. Could you say that again?
Is asking for a research grant to develop an ongoing project different than asking for an art project grant?
Yeah, yeah, it is and it isn't. I mean, ultimately, the application would be effectively the same, but it's just you're at a very different phase in the project. So what it is that you're describing that you'll complete will just be very different from if you were applying for a proper sort of production application. But that is a good thing to point out, is that a lot of these funds have prototyping funds or research funds, because they acknowledge that people need support in those early phases of the process. And then when you're ready to produce, they've got funds for that. And when you want to market your project, some of them have funds for helping you to promote it or travel it. So there's a whole range of applications, and effectively they're the same application, maybe not as dense as a proper production fund, but you also want to be making, this may seem totally obvious, but you just want to make sure that you're describing activities that are reflective of that phase.
And that's a wrap.
Awesome. Well, that's really fun. I really do hope this was useful and informative to everybody. And we're definitely looking to continue this series, and would be definitely looking to some feedback, just in terms of, how useful was this, and maybe what other types of areas could we really focus in on from the grant writing perspective, or maybe other aspects of the production process. So great to meet everyone, and I wish you all the best with your projects.
I'll be reaching out to everyone next week, so we'll stay in touch.
Okay, take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.